Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So there's going to be a little bit of a departure from the topic that was put out in the flyers. I hope that's okay with everyone. Inshallah, it'll be a little bit of a continuation about what we were speaking about in the Jum'ah khutbah. And there's some points that I wanted to add there. I'll do a little bit of summarizing as well, but there's some points I wanted to add in there to kind of like complete, round out all of the edges of the discussion that we were having. And so that's what we're going to do, inshallah. I know the original topic was around the lines of strengthening our faith through trials and tribulations. And this is a portion of that, understanding how we best conceive of Islam in a world that challenges our understanding of Islam, how we ought to live in a world where the Islamic narrative is constantly being undermined, and ultimately as well how we deal with upholding our faith and upholding our commitment to Allah Azza wa Jal when we constantly feel within ourselves, inclinations, when we constantly feel desires, when we feel, when we feel these pulls in a direction opposite from what Allah Azza wa Jal wants us to go towards. So the first thing that I kind of wanted to address, and this reminds me of a conversation I had with an imam who he speaks about these issues a lot, issues of gender and sexual ethics. And there are people who got very frustrated with him. Why are you even talking about these issues? There are far more important issues in the world. Or another way that I heard this actually articulated recently was, you people haven't solved climate change. You haven't solved poverty. You haven't solved systemic racism. You haven't solved all of these other kinds of ills that are plaguing society. And you're worried about drag queen story hour, or you're worried about all of these kinds of what they consider benign components of our society that are popularizing, the LGBTQ agenda. And part of the reason of this focus is not because those other issues are not important. We talk about those other issues. It's important to establish justice. It's important to mitigate corruption. All of those things are of course, of crucial importance. But understand that it is of a fundamentally different category to speak about things that are min thawabit ad-din. They're from the fundamentals of the religion. They form the foundation of the religion. They are those immutable characteristics over time. There is no one today from the Muslimin who is unsure whether in our modern day corruption is okay or not. There's no one in our modern day who says, I'm okay with people dying of poverty. These are not things that are threatening are threatening how we view the religion properly. However, this particular issue that we're talking about today is exactly of that category, where people are taking things that are ma'loom min ad-dini bid-darura, things that are known in the religion out of necessity. Like we spoke about in the khutbah today, there is plenty in the religion that is amenable to debate. Some of the ahkam of salah or so on, some of the ahkam of zakah, several different kinds of things. They're amenable to debate. The ulama have debated them in great detail. This is not one of them. This is not one of them. And so when we find people, especially within the Muslim ummah, that are challenging or struggling to understand, of course, because of the conditioning that this society has done to us, the damage that this social conditioning has done to our sensibilities, that we are now suddenly looking to these things that are known from the religion by necessity and saying, these two ought to be up for debate. How many of you are familiar with the document that circulated not long ago called Navigating Differences? Navigating Differences. Clarifying Sexual Ethics in Islam. I believe that was the full document. Navigating Differences, Clarifying Sexual Ethics in Islam. And I thought that it was mashallah, it was a great attempt and a great effort by the mashayikh and du'at of America. About over 200 mashayikh and du'at put their signature on this statement, in which they made absolutely clear the categorical stance of Islam against the permissibility of same-sex relations. Not attraction, same-sex relations. And the entirety of that list was filled with mashayikh and ustads and du'at. In response to that statement, there was another document that came out called Reclaiming Islam. Reclaiming Islam. And it was filled with people, Allah knows if they're real names or not, but it was filled with people who signed on to this document in which they're challenging the narrative that Islam categorically prohibits same-sex relations. And what is very important for us to note, and it points to an issue that we have, a significant issue that we have, that in one list you have scholars within our society, and in another list you had people with no formal Islamic education, with no grounding in the Islamic tradition. And that difference is of the utmost importance. Because we're saying that the common people have come together to understand something, that the entirety of the mashayikh or virtually those who are representative of our Muslim society, the entirety of those mashayikh, they've made a mistake, but the common people have not. This points to a crisis of religious authority. It points to the fact that within the Muslim community at large, not just the Muslim community that attend masajid, but the Muslim community at large does not properly value religious authority and does not properly value religious scholarship. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, when you have some kind of conflict, when you have some kind of confusion, if you are left asking, then you must turn to the people of knowledge as the basis of clarifying your confusion. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. If the people of knowledge, if the scholars who have united upon something, if they are upon error, then who will find guidance? In our time, people think that just because they have access to YouTube, because they take an Islam 101 class offered by their professor within the university, suddenly this has enabled them to, derive of their own liking whatever they wish of their religion. And that is not how a proper methodology works. An especially important point to understand here is that academia, the universities, what they incentivize, what they promote is not sticking to tradition. What academia incentivizes is the emergence of new theories. Do you think Harvard will give you a stipend for 6 years of a PhD for you to come at the end of it and say, you know what, I did my research, they were right all along. They were right all along. As the traditionalists have been saying it, that's it. Give me the PhD. You're gonna say, what were we paying you for 6 years? Why were we investing in you? Why did we throw a brand on you so that you could come out at the end of it and say, I have nothing new to offer? It's as they've been saying to us the entire time. So in fact, academia incentivizes, it puts its money in the fact that we will invest in people so that they can take divergent opinions, find interesting backing for them underneath, and now promote it as though it has some kind of justification. Just like there are hot takes in Twitter, there are hot takes in academia. There are folks that they want to get attention, they want to get published. And so the kinds of things that do that are going to be those anomalies that they promote and then try to say that not only is this an anomaly, this is an anomaly that nobody missed, that everybody missed until I came along today. So this truly shows the difference that we have. One of the things that we mentioned in the khutbah today was that a problem in our thinking is that just like science advances with time, just like we learn more and more through research, you do more and more experiments, more technologies are advanced, you have capacity to research on different levels. You had one kind of microscope, it was showing you things on one level, then you develop another kind of microscope, it shows you things at a different level, and so on and so on. And people, they take that way of thinking and they apply it to the religion. They say, surely as time progresses, then we must be progressing in our knowledge of the world as well in terms of values and morality. Values and morality are immutable features. When we say that Islam has ruled such and such when it comes to honesty or modesty or chastity, all of these things, there will never come a time where they invent some kind of new technology that will suddenly now realize that, chastity wasn't as important as they used to say. Modesty shouldn't have been elevated to this kind of virtue as they say. And the problem there is applying, this thinking when it comes to science, which it works in that field, it works in that domain, but it is of another domain, it is of another utility when it comes to the Islamic sciences. In fact, the exact opposite is true. The earlier that we can point to knowledge, the more authentic it is. The closer that you can tie an opinion or a point of view with the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the older that you can show that it is, in fact, the more authentic that it is. So it is of a completely different paradigm. To swap out one for the other will surely lead to a lot of issues. So again, why are we worrying about this issue? Is because it presents a very significant type of threat. People are not challenging whether corruption is bad, whether poverty is bad, whether racism is bad, but they are now challenging whether Allah Azza wa Jal has made this thing permissible, which categorically the texts of the religion and the scholars of the religion have been unified in condemning. So it becomes problematic to take something that is so clearly evidenced in the religion and to challenge it. Because in the same way that we establish the prohibition of same-sex acts is the same way that we establish the obligation of salah, is the same way that we establish the obligation of hajj. It is through the Quran and Sunnah. When you now take commands within our religion that have never been up for debate and start changing them, then the entirety of the religion becomes vulnerable. The entirety of the religion becomes susceptible to attack. So the reason why we are so loud on these issues is because it does not just threaten one issue. It threatens the entirety of the religion. And Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. Do you believe in a portion of the book and disbelieve in another portion of the book? What Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, what could possibly be the reward for someone who does that, except that he humiliates them in this world and that he humiliates them in the hereafter? Who will take you seriously? If you look to some ayat, say, this, is not politically expedient at the moment. This, it doesn't serve us well right now. And this stuff, it's fine. It makes me feel good. I can tweet about it. I can talk about it at work. This is the kind of stuff I'm going to go with. This is, no one takes these kinds of people seriously. So that's the first thing that I wanted to get out of the way. The other thing is to emphasize the Islamic worldview. The Islamic worldview has who at the center? One more time. Allah. At the center of the Islamic worldview. Why we do anything is for Allah Azza wa Jal. At the core of the Islamic worldview, who gets to define the standard of right and wrong? who gets to define morality, all of that comes from Allah Azza wa Jal. All of that comes from Allah Azza wa Jal. The modern project, however, it seeks to displace Allah from the center of our worldview and replace it with man, and replace it with the human being. In doing so, it deifies man. It tries to elevate humanity to the status of a god. أَفَرَأَيْتَ مَنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ. Have you seen the one who takes his own desires as a god, as the object of worship? This is something Allah was warning us about. So what happens when you displace Allah from the center of your worldview and make it man, no longer is the question, what is pleasing to Allah? No longer is the question, what did Allah say is right and wrong? The question now becomes, what makes me happy? The question now becomes, what serves my interest? The question becomes, what makes me feel comfortable with what is right and what is wrong? And what is very important to understand as well is that this kind of thinking is the product of very discrete historical contingencies. It is the product of Enlightenment thinking. It is the product of authors like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, for example, one of the Enlightenment thinkers, who tied authenticity is being able to align your external actions with your feelings. Authenticity, according to him, is being able to align your external actions with your internal feelings. Now, that's to say that whatever I feel inside, if it does not manifest outside, I'm being inauthentic to myself. And how many people have you heard who said, I was having these same-sex attractions, but I could no longer be inauthentic to myself. I could no longer be inauthentic to myself. I had to switch boats. I had to claim this other identity. And so this is the product of a very discrete phenomenon in history that has occurred. Brothers and sisters, we are not the religion of feelings. We spent an entire month, day in and day out, you were reminded that the most fundamental of your desires, your desire for water, your desire for food, was to be limited in accordance to what Allah Azza wa Jal had prescribed for you. Do you think this was a physical exercise? Do you think it was merely a physical exercise? That the most fundamental of our desires was limited and restricted on a daily basis for a month, so that you could practice physically, so that you could grow, so that you could wean yourself off of caffeine headaches? This was supposed to be the goal of Ramadan? Or was it to get you to understand that every single ounce of your existence, every fiber of your being must come to submission to Allah Azza wa Jal? So when someone tells you, oh, you feel something that makes you entitled to act upon it, we reject this utterly. This is not a premise that we accept. This is a presupposition that is not grounded in the foundations of our religion. In fact, the opposite is true. That day in and day out, Allah Azza wa Jal, He praises those who fight their desires. وَأَمَّا مَنْ خَافَ مَقَامَ رَبِّهِ وَنَهَى النَّفْسَ عَنِ الْهَوَى. Allah praises that person who fears standing in front of Allah, and they prohibited themselves from their desires. Allah doesn't say they found a way to not even experience these desires anymore. That even though they experienced desires, they prohibited themselves from that. Does this mean that we do not seek authenticity? That authenticity is a bad thing? Of course not. Authenticity is desirable. Authenticity is something that we pursue. But the way that we define ourselves as human beings is first and foremost that we are the creation of Allah. And that Allah Azza wa Jal has put within us a fitrah. Fitrat Allah allati fatara an-nasa alayha. Allah Azza wa Jal has put a disposition within the human being that can either be nurtured or it can be destroyed. That disposition is one that turns to Allah Azza wa Jal in recognition of their purpose, in recognition of their status as the servant of Allah. So authenticity now is for us to redefine as coming in line, is realigning our purpose with our external actions. It is not about aligning our feelings with our external actions. It is about aligning our purpose with our external actions. So when Allah Azza wa Jal has defined your purpose to be submission to Him alone and to worship Him alone, then your external actions must toe the line. This is authenticity. This is authenticity. Authenticity is not that you succumb to every whisper that occurs in your mind. This is not how we define authenticity. So when a person asks, then why do I feel these desires? Why did Allah put in me natural desires that go against what He's legislating? That go against what He's legislating. There's two assumptions here, and wallahi, this is one of, if I can ever pass on any lesson throughout any halaqah that I give, let it be this. Let us learn to challenge the assumptions and the material that comes our way. When you hear a question, you must ask yourself, what are the assumptions that this is based upon? What are the muqaddimat? What are the premises that this question is coming from? Don't just go right away answering your question. Why did Allah do this to me if I feel this naturally? And you say, just be patient. No, challenge the premises, or at least investigate what presuppositions are baked into the questions that come your way. So when someone says, why do I feel these desires if Allah doesn't want me to act upon them? The first assumption that we must investigate is that someone thinks that if I experience something naturally, then by virtue of the fact that I experience that naturally, I must be entitled to act upon it. And this is a premise that we do not accept. Just because you feel something naturally does not mean that you are justified in acting upon it. Just like we said, is there anyone here, please raise your hand, if you do not experience thirst in the month of Ramadan while you are fasting? Anyone here who does not experience thirst in the month of Ramadan while fasting? MashaAllah So understand, this is a natural desire. This is a natural desire. You are not justified in it being natural for you to act upon it. Why does Allah put in my heart anger if He doesn't want me to slap someone across the face? Why does Allah put jealousy in my heart if He doesn't want me to act upon it? Why does Allah give me a body and expose it to illness? Why does Allah give me a child and allow me to lose that child? Why does Allah give me a marriage and allow that marriage to succumb to divorce? Why is it that Allah can give me things and take them away? What is baked in that thinking? First of all, it is that if something happens naturally, then I must be entitled to act upon it. I feel thirsty in the month of Ramadan. I don't know about you guys, you can wait until Maghrib, but I genuinely feel this thirst, so I'm going to drink at Dhuhr time. This is a silly premise. And it's silly for us to succumb to it as well. So it must be challenged. Number two, baked into that question is also that, why would Allah test me in this way? Why would Allah test me in this way? We mentioned some examples. Why would Allah give me a child and then test me with losing that child? Why would Allah finally allow me to have the wedding of my dreams and then have to let my friends and family know 3 months later, it didn't work out? Why would Allah do that to me? And the question really is, why do you think Allah can't do that to you? This thinking is difficult upon us if we have centered ourselves in our worldview. But if we keep Allah at the center of our worldview, then it makes sense. We are abd and He is Rabb. Allah's introduction to Himself on the first page of the Mus'haf is here, He establishes that relationship. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. All praise and gratitude are for the Master, the Lord of the worlds. If He defines Himself as Master, then you are His servant. If I say I'm the boss, then someone else is the employee, right? He defined what the nature of that relationship is in the first lines of our Mus'haf. So that relationship is established clearly. But also Allah Azza wa Jal, He points to this emphatically in the Quran. أَحَسِبَ النَّاسُ أَن يُتْرَكُوا أَن يَقُولُوا آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. In fact, it's almost treated like a silly assumption. Do people really think that they can claim that they believe and they are not going to be tested? What a silly assumption. What an audacious assumption, that you think you can make the grandest of claims and that claim won't be tested for its sincerity. The Prophet ﷺ, he also says that حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةِ بِالْمَكَارِهِ حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةِ بِالْمَكَارِهِ. The paradise, brothers and sisters, it is surrounded by things that we don't like. Paradise is surrounded by things that we don't like. وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. And that the hellfire was surrounded by desires, by those things that people are seeking. So, does it make sense that as a Muslim we now accept that as a justification? Because we feel something naturally, then this allows for us to act upon it? Or that we assume that Allah Azza wa Jal could not test us in this way? So again, let me reiterate a couple of things. Allah Azza wa Jal does not hold us to account for the thoughts that we have. Allah Azza wa Jal does not hold us to account for the thoughts that we have. Allah Azza wa Jal holds us to account for the actions that we have, for the actions that we perform. And a person who experiences these desires, as strong as they may be, if they fight against them, then wallahi, these people are heroes. Allah Azza wa Jal, if you fight against these desires, and you do so for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, then wallahi, I can only imagine how tremendous of a reward Allah Azza wa Jal has prepared for such a person. A person is not a bad person because they have bad thoughts. In fact, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they came to him and they said, O Messenger of Allah, we have thoughts about Allah that we would rather be thrown in the sky than to ever even utter them. We would rather become non-existent, thrown off the planet, than to utter some of the thoughts that we have about Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says to them, you really find that amongst yourselves? You're really experiencing that? They said, yes, O Messenger of Allah. And he says, to hell with you. Does he say to hell with you? He says, ذَاكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ ذَاكَ صَرِيحُ الْإِيمَانِ. He says, that is true faith. That is true faith. Is he saying true faith is that you doubt your Lord? True faith is that you have negative thoughts of Allah? True faith is that you would rather be thrown in the sky than have a negative thought of Allah. You know? So a person is not held into account for the thoughts that they have. You do not have control over your thoughts, but you do have control over your actions. And Allah Azza wa Jal will hold us into account for our actions. I want to reiterate the point. We made it in the khutbah, but again, just want to reiterate the point. This is typically, this point here about thoughts and actions is normally how we address this issue. And it is correct. However, it doesn't tend to a modern issue that we have in our time, and that is the issue of identity. The issue of identity. That sexuality has become intertwined inextricably with identity. So a person now thinks to themselves, who I am at my core is a gay person. Who I am at my core is these feelings. And like we said before, Islam is not an item on a buffet where, you have You have gender, you have sexual orientation, you have ethnicity, you have, political leanings, and then you have religion. And all of these, they present your intersectional identity. And Islam happens to be just one of these things that, gets added to your other identities. Islam is not an item on a buffet. Islam is the lens through which we look at all of the other items on the buffet. And we say, oh, even these other identities that I may have, they will be informed by my identity as a Muslim. My expression as a male will be informed by my identity as a Muslim. My expression, my ethnicity, nationality, political leanings, all of that will be subordinated to my identity as a Muslim. So when a person is told nowadays, if they've adopted their sexuality as the foundation of their identity, when they're told Islam doesn't allow you to act this way, what they hear is not, oh, my actions are being limited. What they're told is that my identity does not have a space to exist. My humanity does not have a place to flourish. And so again, what we reiterate here is that our identity is not our sexual attractions. It is possible to live a very fulfilling life while not having the ability to act upon our sexual attractions. There are even people that, they're attracted to the same gender, right? But Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't open up a pathway to them for marriage. It is the test that they have to deal with. And Allah tests people in different ways. Allah tests them with terminal illness, with the loss of a loved one, whatever He sees fit. But this issue of identity, when we're saying this is what Islam asks of us, it is not saying you can't be who you are. We don't give you a space to exist. We're saying Islam gives all of us defined ways to exist in this world. And all of us are subject to the restrictions that Allah Azza wa Jalla has put for us. Brothers and sisters, remember the story of Abu Bakr after Isra wal Mi'raj. After Isra wal Mi'raj. When the people came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, you are claiming that in the span of a night, something that takes us the journey of 2 months, you did in the span of a night? And not just that. After that, you ascended to the heavens. Come, please tell the people in public what you've just told me. And this was something that they went to the rest of the companions and say, this person that you've been following, this is his most ridiculous claim yet. How do you justify this? And they came to Abu Bakr, radiyallahu anhu wa ardah. They came to Abu Bakr, and look at his methodology as well. Wallahi, take a lesson from his methodology. He says, if he said it, then I believe it. And he says, I believe him when it comes to much grander claims. The fact that I believe that this man receives revelation from Allah Azza wa Jal, you think it is beyond the capacity of God that He takes him upon a journey throughout the span of a night? So similarly, brothers and sisters, when you think that I am being so challenged, my rationale, my Western defined sensibilities are being so challenged by Islamic teachings, that it is for us to reevaluate and say, this religion is from Allah Azza wa Jal. That is our starting point. Establish for yourself that the religion is for Allah Azza wa Jal, that He is your Lord, that we worship Him, and by virtue of that, He gets to dictate to us how we ought to live our lives. So, the way that we move beyond this kind of test, if a person experiences these attractions, one resource that maybe a person finds suitable, might find useful, is a podcast by a brother who is a practicing Muslim and experiences same-sex attractions. He operates online by a pseudonym. His name is Wahid Johnson. Not his real name, but he goes by Wahid Johnson. The name of the podcast is Away Beyond the Rainbow. Away Beyond the Rainbow. So it has dozens of episodes where they examine this. Another way that we can live fulfilling lives is by establishing our community connections. Finding ways to give back to the community, being a part of your community. There's other ways to live fulfilled lives without having that outlet be satisfied. Being dutiful to our parents. Being dutiful to our parents, this is a pathway to fulfillment. Volunteering, busying ourselves with helping others, and the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. This is what we were created for. In times of difficulty, we return to Allah Azza wa Jal. No one is saying that there will come a day where this won't be difficult for you any longer. But we're saying that if you experience this and are steadfast, then there will come a day where the reward of Allah Azza wa Jal is near. And I don't want to belabor the point, but the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned to us that even the people who went through the hardest of lives, the most difficult of lives in this world, they will be just dipped into the paradise. They will be dipped. And that person will say that, Wallahi, I have never experienced difficulty ever in my life. I have never experienced calamity ever in my life. So all of this struggle that we experience will have been worth it in the end. Lastly, I want to make a point about challenging assumptions again. Just like we were talking about challenging the presuppositions and questions. When people say, you don't support LGBT rights, challenge that. Challenge that. Rights are what Allah Azza wa Jal gives me as a right. I don't get to assign a right for myself and then say, now I get to advocate for it because I just refer to it as a right. Don't say, oh, you're against LGBT rights, and you say, yes, I'm against LGBT rights. No. Say, Allah gets to define what rights we have. And as a creation of Allah, I surrender to what Allah Azza wa Jal has laid down for me as restrictions. So please challenge the narrative and understand you are within your constitutional protections, and beyond that, the constitution of Allah Azza wa Jal covers you. So when the difficulty comes our way, it's important for us to be clear on these issues, to not capitulate to the pressures of our time. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. If there are any questions, comments, observations, the floor is open to all.
Jazakumullah khair, Brother Jamali. This is a very, very beautiful talk, very cogent, and very well woven. So one of the things which you mentioned earlier on is, you referred to the documents that came out on this issue.
Yeah.
And I think especially for younger people who are going to universities in a secular environment, there's nothing wrong with it. But what we need to kind of keep in mind, and as you pointed out, is there is a certain level of intellectual arrogance which is seeping into especially people with highly educated degrees, or people who pursue, say, philosophy or even science, right? So this whole premise that, we know more than you because you're outdated, so to speak. It's something that also needs to be addressed with the younger youth, with the youth who are going to universities, because when you go to a scientist to figure out, a phenomena that you don't understand, say in biology or any science, and you wouldn't go to an accountant to do that because you obviously understand that that's not the right avenue. When it comes to religion, a lot of people flip the other way around, especially people with a lot of secular education. And I say this from a point of experience and from a point of observation over the years. And I think that's something that is fundamentally flawed in terms of its logic. And I think that's something that should be addressed at some point.
So there's two things I want to say here. The first of them is that it is unfortunate, but we as a community inculcate disrespect for religious scholarship. We as a community have embedded, or at least in some portions of our community, have embedded disrespect for religious scholarship. And how does that manifest? It manifests in the following way, that especially in many countries, Muslim countries of the world, the people who perform the highest in school are not the ones that are told to become imams. The people that perform the best academically are the ones that are told to go into engineering and medicine. And you will find that when the people who couldn't get into law school and medical school and engineering, the people who couldn't uphold a decent GPA are the ones who are told to become Molvis, is there's a natural disrespect on a societal level that becomes inbred. So when a person when a person now gets into medical school and looks at the imam and thinks like, well, he does this because he couldn't do anything better, then of course they're not going. There's the arrogance there, but there's also the disrespect that's kind of like been engendered along the way. And so one of the things that I think is important for us to do is to understand that we need to invest seriously in religious education, and that the best of our minds, you see someone who is especially intelligent, you say, this is the kind of mind that would really serve the deen well. This doesn't mean it needs to be to the exclusion of other professional pursuits. Of course not necessarily, right? But the brightest of minds should also be invested into pursuing Islamic education. The other thing that I'll say with regards to, you enter the secular world, you enter academia and so on, and your beliefs are challenged. One of the things that I want to point out is, if you guys have the, what's it called? If you guys are up for it, there's a book called The Disenchantment of Secular Discourse. It's a little bit of a hard read. It's written by a law professor, so in some parts of it are actually like case studies of legal cases. But it is a great work that talks about how so many agenda items are smuggled in, this is his word, are smuggled in through popular vocabulary in our time. So amongst these words are words like choice, words like equality, words like freedom. These words are very easily impregnable with meaning. What does choice mean? You get to choose what you want. No one actually accepts that as a premise. It's always about what is it that you're choosing. That you have freedom. What does that mean? The freedom to do what? We are equal. No one disagrees that if two things are the same, that they be treated equally. The question is whether they are the same. So anytime you see these kinds of words, this should be a red flag. What are the agenda items that are being kind of like promoted inside that aren't being clearly stated? Okay? And one example that I've benefited from personally is the following. The Islamic worldview, think of it as a tree, right? Deeply rooted. It has its branches, has its trunk, has its branches. And if you think of the opposing worldview next to it, it has its roots and it has its branches. And if we look at the both of them next to each other, you might see that there might be some kind of overlap. And because of our hunger for validation, we've looked at that overlap and said, look what Islam does for the rights of women. Look what Islam says about democracy. Look what Islam says about all of these kinds of things. And we point to the overlap. Not realizing that this overlap is coming from entirely different foundations, coming from entirely different roots. So for us to, anytime you see these kinds of similarities, understand they're coming from different paradigms and often conflicting paradigms. I think Brother Usman came up to beat me up for taking too long. No? Okay. We can keep, because I told him I'd end before 9:30.
No, we have 5 more minutes. Five
Okay,
more minutes. So
all right.
we'll make an.
Okay, inshallah. All right. If you guys have more questions, just know.
I thought Usman will also have a question for you.
Okay.
Ask the question.
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. So, one thing that is creeping up into the workplace these days is the use of pronouns.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I don't know what your take is on that. Personally, I don't use it. I mean, using it is usually viewed as being accommodating and welcoming, and whatever that means.
Yeah.
So I would like to know what your take is and what you would advise Muslims to how to proceed on that.
Yeah. I think if people are asking us to be accommodating of worldviews that oppose our worldview fundamentally, that this is unreasonable ask for us. I think to do so, to put your pronouns on things, is an irresponsible thing to do. I think it's something that it is lending legitimacy to something that is rooted in a completely different worldview. When you say he, him, and I am a he, him, then it's saying that this is legitimate. I'm a he, him, you could not be a he, him, that's fine, to each their own. So if they ask you to do it, all right, that's fine, that's an email you didn't read. I missed that memo. HR can talk to me about it, and if they want to impose speech upon me, then that'll be something that they have to escalate further. But it's not something that you yourself, someone sends an email, oh, put these in, that's fine. You still don't have to do it. I've been in meetings before at a liberal university. They said, please go around, talk about your department, what you do, all of this, your pronouns. My name is Muhammad, I'm the Muslim chaplain, I do XYZ. And suddenly everyone still figured out how to refer to me without me mentioning my pronouns. So I don't think that we have to succumb to these kinds of things. That pressure that they put is more here than it is in real life. That's not to say that that pressure might become very real in some ways, but there's barakah in the struggle, and I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to make it easy, inshallah. Questions on the sister side? Hint has a question. You don't have to get up.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa
The
rahmatullah.
only thing, like, I was wondering about what you just said. I feel like, is that really like courteous to, deliberately antagonize someone who, has gender dysphoria and just ask you, like, if they're making the effort to present as that gender and they're not a good faith ether, right? Is it really like your business to be like, oh, well, my religion says this? Because at the end of the day, they have a different like perspective than you, and you're not really going to convince them. So like, why would you just do something that's going to come off as like rude and antagonizing?
Good. No, I appreciate the question. So let me start with the second half of that question. The Quraysh had different perspectives than the Prophet ﷺ. They actually had radically different perspectives than the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet was not told, actually, there's going to be plenty of them that you're not going to convince, so don't even bother preaching to them. So that's one thing. Just because people have different perspectives does not mean that we can't share with them our perspective. That's one thing. The other thing, though, is I'm not saying to go out and deliberately refer to people in ways that they're not asking you to refer to them. There's ways kind of around this issue without having to really create a problem about it, especially in the workplace. Gender dysphoria is a real problem. My heart goes out to someone who is pained in that way, right? What I'm saying is, when someone asks you to put your pronouns on something, you don't have to do that. If someone is asking you to acknowledge them by a certain set of pronouns that very evidently don't represent who Allah Azza wa Jal created them as, I think that the best thing to do is to avoid having to refer to them in that way. If they tell you their name is Sally and their name used to be Rick, probably refer to them as Sally. But I wouldn't go out of my way to constantly validate a person's pronouns. There are kind of a ways to like be cautious around these things without having to explicitly be confrontational all the time. This isn't a conversation about always having to be confrontational at every moment where someone says, these are my pronouns, and so on. It's about, one, how we represent our faith, and then how we deal with people. We always treat people with respect. People who disbelieve in Allah, we still treat them with respect, right? We treat them with a sense of dignity, and we want khair for them. We want iman for them. Like we want it for ourselves, we want iman for them too. So there are ways, I think, to kind of like tread this cautiously without undermining our religion. Inshallah, last question.
Jazakallah khair, brother. My question in regards to the Muslim political participation in terms of these issues. What's your advice for the Muslim community in terms of participating politically to push or like fight against the other people agenda? And it seems like they're succeeding in it. They're getting into high positions in the state, the government, and they're pushing our agenda. Where as a Muslim community, we're still fighting whether voting is halal or haram. I mean, they seem like they're far ahead of us in terms of political participation. Jazakallah khair.
Okay. I think the first thing, obviously, I'm no political scientist, so please take whatever I say with a grain of salt. Political participation is not necessarily some kind of like panacea to the problems that we have as Muslimin here. If we are able to protect our ability to worship Allah in this country, then that's a great political achievement. I don't think it serves us to undermine the principles of our religion for votes, for seats in Congress, for representation in commercials, in movies, in political debates, all of these kinds of things. I don't think it serves the religion for us to sacrifice the thawabit of our deen, for us to sacrifice key components of our religion to attain those ends. And in fact, I think if anything, it undermines the cause severely more when I have to justify why Ilhan Omar is dancing in a pride parade when someone asks me like, oh, but when you say this is what Islam represents, that's just conservative Islam. That's just strict Islam. Rather than it being like, no, this is Islam. This is Islam, and that's a person who needs a vote. So that's one. The other thing is, I think we can do much more on a local level without necessarily having to escalate things to that level. If we are true to ourselves, and Allah doesn't take us to that higher end where you find your name on the ballot for presidency, that's okay. We still retained our values. If we sacrifice our values to end up on a ballot, we didn't gain anything, right? Al-ghayat la tubarriru al-wasa'il. The ends don't justify the means, right? Yeah. I mean, it seems to be the case that anyone that has tried to do this, anyone who deals with politics at all, realizes that if you're trying to garner votes, you have to appease as many people as possible. That's a pressure. That's a push in a certain direction, right? And obviously, there's a dominant trajectory of that push. The Democrats and the Republicans are both philosophical liberals. I'm going to say that again, because sometimes we use the word liberalism and people think I'm talking about liberals and conservatives. The Democrats and Republicans are both philosophical liberals. That they take liberalism as their methodology, as their belief system about what it means for the state to impinge on certain freedoms, for personal autonomy. All of those things are taken as a given. That's the water that a person is endeavoring to swim in. So if you want to swim in that water, you might get a little wet, So that's, if someone can show us how it's done to not sacrifice and still get the votes, bismillah, that person has my vote. But from what we've seen, from the attempts that we've seen so far, it doesn't seem to be the case, at least from the attempts we've seen on the congressional level. And Allah knows best. I ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to give us tawfiq. Jazakumullah khairan. Appreciate your participation.
Assalamu alaikum. So I have a couple of quick announcements so that we could go to dinner and then we'll have salat together. So tonight's dinner was sponsored by the Akram family, Brother Furqan and his entire family. They are going through a lot of struggles, health issues, and they ask for du'as. This is all they ask for, is for du'as. So please remember them in your du'as. Also, we're going to continue the program. We're going to try to provide dinner every Friday. Dr. Mamadou is here. Can you stand up?
Please, he is in charge of collecting the funds for it. It costs us about $1,200 to provide a dinner for about 250 people. And you don't have to provide, 1,200. He tells me any amount you give him, he will take. So please, now some people say, who is Dr. Mamadou? He's here. You see him. Please see him and sponsor a Friday night. This is very important. This is where we want to be. This is where we want our families to be. So please, let's sustain this program, inshallah, by sponsoring it. If you have friends and family who don't come to Friday Night Halaqah and they could afford to sponsor it, call them, tell them to sponsor Friday Night Halaqah so that the rest of us could have dinner. At least tell them that, inshallah. You want to say something?
No, I mean, just if you have maybe a graduation party, think about the masjid to do it. If you have a haqiqah, you want to do it here. I mean, you don't have to pay for the venue, but you can sponsor a Friday night. So those are the few things that we can do to help out.
MashaAllah, great idea. I wasn't even thinking about it, but as you know, he's really up to task. So please, consider all those things. Graduation party is coming. A lot of them are coming. Let's make Friday night a graduation party, halal graduation party for our community, and we'll say big takbirs for whoever is involved. Also, as we're resuming, as we all know from the last Friday, we did a halakha, a lot of incidents happened. So we've set a few rules and we want people to really help us to make every Friday night a very pleasant night. One of the few rules we have is that if you come in for Friday night halakha, and perhaps every time you come in the masjid, please leave your shoes on the shoe rack. Leave your shoes on the shoe rack. The shoes are everywhere. Beginning next Friday, we'll be getting those shoe racks, put them in the bag, and put them outside. Okay, so beginning next Friday, if your shoes are not on the shoe rack, wherever we find them in the building, the sisters, you'd like to bring your shoes up here, no good. Please leave your shoes on the shoe rack. We'll be putting them outside from next Friday. Also, we have a lot of kids here. We want the kids to be here. Parents, if you want to help, put together a program for the kids in the cafeteria, something, talk to me. We want the kids to be here, but we don't want them to be an extreme distraction when this is going on. So please step up, help us organize the kids so we can have a pleasant, these topics we're talking about here, this is our future. This is how we're going to build a stronger community. And if some of us walk out of here without getting anything from it because there's a lot of noise in the background, and folks come to me all the time and say, brother, I didn't hear a word because there was so much noise in the background. So your case, my case, are denying people from taking value from what we're doing. So please help us with that. Also, today we tried this. We're gonna go to dinner and we're gonna come back and do Isha. Inshallah, we'll continue doing this for a few weeks and see how it works. But after dinner, please help us clean up, because there is no joy in leaving one or two brothers or sisters downstairs after Salat. Everybody walks home and they have to stay here till after midnight. The least you could do is to just put your plate in the trash and tell your neighbor to put the plate in the trash. That would help. But if you could do more, there's more barakah in that, inshallah. So those are the few rules. So please help us make this an enjoyable Friday night every Friday, inshallah.